Welcome to Eyes on Books, a production of the Video Club of Laguna Woods and a feature presentation on Village Television. I'm here today with my co-host, Susan Wheeler, and we're going to be reviewing a wonderful book I think you'll enjoy. The title of the book is How the Penguin Saved Veronica by the author Hazel Pryor. Welcome, Susan. It's fun to be here. I enjoyed this book. What about you?
Oh, Jonathan, I agree. I wasn't too sure in the beginning. This was a difficult character in the beginning, but in the end, absolutely. I loved it. It was a real delight.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the author and the book itself. The book is, I think, it's the second published work, major published work by Hazel Pryor. She has an earlier book called Ellie and the Harp Maker. This book was published in the UK under the title of, Away the Penguins, and published in the US as How the Penguin Saved Veronica. She has two additional books, which we hope to talk to the author about. They look to be very worthwhile after reading this book. Hazel Pryor was born in Oxford, England, and she spent a number of years living in Scotland, and she currently lives, as I understand, in Exmoor, England. Another delightful bit of information about Hazel: she's also a performing harpist. Now, I like the harp, particularly the Celtic harp. One of my favorite performers actually is Maeve Gilchrist, and also, it's an old tradition, the harp in Ireland, England, going back to the days in the 1700s of Turlough O'Carolan, going around Ireland telling stories. Well, Hazel brings us a wonderful story about a remarkable character. Can you give us some insight into this character?
Oh, absolutely. Well, let me give you a brief summary of the book. This is a story set in current times, and it's a story of Veronica McCready, who is a wealthy 85-year-old woman who lives in a very large home in isolation in the far west coast of Scotland. Now, she's a rather curmudgeonly, grumpy woman with very high standards. Nothing is quite right with her, and she's very critical and opinionated. I kind of thought, Jonathan, I kind of kept thinking of Maggie Smith, in Downton Abbey, putting her face to, she was my Veronica. But anyway, Veronica has no family, no friends, and the only person she has in her life is her housekeeper, Eileen, whom she really doesn't like Eileen at all either. So, but the big issue in this story is, what is Veronica going to do with her vast, vast fortune? She has no one to leave it to. First, she discovers she has a grandson she did not know about, but he turns out to be quite a disappointment. Then she discovers she loves watching this program on television it's a nature documentary about penguins. And she's just so taken with these delightful penguins, she gets involved in that. The third element in the book is a diary that's discovered. Now, this is a diary that was written when she was 14 years old. And as we go through these years during her diary, and as her past is revealed, we learn about the tragic life she has had over the years, and how that has made her such a curmudgeonly old woman. So, Jonathan, that's kind of the setting, wouldn't you say?
I would. I think she's such a remarkable character. I find she's not really easy to like.
Oh, absolutely not.
But, Susan, she's very easy to care about. That's a remarkable feat. The author does a wonderful job with that. She's just not unlikable. Just, you care about her. You realize what if a life she had, her experiences, but I find her to be, I'll grant you, she can be a bit curmudgeonly, but I find her brave. I find her resolute. She's not given up. But you notice, this is a woman who has quite a successful career. but she was a successful banker
Yes.
and property investor.
Very.
So she acquired quite a fortune.
Yes.
And that's to her credit.
Absolutely.
All of it is.
Quite a,
So she finds this grandson. His name is Patrick. And he's not much to her liking, but he turns out to be quite a character. The thing that draws us into the story is the whole penguin dimension, if I may say. These remarkable little creatures, they're only yay high.
Mm-hmm.
You've got to spend a minute looking at a documentary of penguins to really get into the heart of this book.
Oh, they're so joyous.
Adorable.
Oh, how can you not smile when you see a penguin?
One of the things you realize eventually is that they become part of a family, a very surprising family.
Well, yes, and that's what this book is about. It's about how Veronica, who is so disillusioned with life, discovers, and that's how she discovers the real joy of family, of caring for each other, and of, the joy of life.
Veronica likes to watch documentary shows, particularly about nature and animals.
Mm-hmm.
I think the show she watched that introduced her to penguins was a little bit like in Aladdin's lamp, because she made 3 wishes and they all came true. One wish is for family. She found Patrick. The second wish is to help change the world for the better. The third wish is to live and to flourish, and to cause other people to flourish. This is something that earlier she was rather despairing about.
Oh, that's
86 years old, but at some point, a key turning point in the story, she embraces life.
She absolutely does. And it's, I have to say, I had a kind of a hard time starting with this because she was so disagreeable. And I think some of the time, living in a senior community like this, I've met a lot of disagreeable people. And I didn't want to read this anymore about this disagreeable woman. But I think it was important for the author to present her that way because it made the ending such a, I shed a few tears at the end. It was so moving, the amazing transformation this woman made in her life. And what I liked especially too was there were only 5 characters in the whole story. I mean, unlike many other books, they got 20, 30 different people to keep track of. We knew each of these 5 stories that were going on. And it was told in each of their own point of views from the first person. And I think that had a real effect on it. The story of Patrick, the story of Veronica, the story that comes out of this diary that they find that was written when she was 14 years old. And the story from the penguinologist in Antarctica, Terry. And it's those 5 stories that merged, or 4 stories that merged together into letting us see how all the layers of Veronica's life have been peeled off. And we see this amazing transformation in the end that has taken place in Antarctica.
It's a remarkable place. One of the features of the book that I enjoyed is a certain adventure aspect to it. This is a remarkable place. I don't think I really want to go there. It's the South Shetland Islands in Antarctica. It's a bitter, harsh place. But for that reason too, the people that share that life in that insular little location, the laboratory where they reside and where they do their work, it's a remarkable place. There's a real intimacy. There's a real need to work together and support each other and help each other. Because once they go outside, it's a vastly different world. Very physical, very harsh world. But on the other hand, when you go outside, see all these adorable penguins. In the book, one of the things that happens, I think, gives true meaning to the story, is they find a baby penguin, and the proper thing to do in that case is to let it die.
Right. You can't
The harsh
tamper with
environment,
nature.
it's going to die.
Right.
Let nature take its course.
Absolutely.
But Veronica won't have it. Just won't have it. You know how stubborn she can be.
She's a force.
She's a force of nature. She won't let it happen. So they adopt this little penguin, eventually calling him Pip, which I think is an adorable name. And what a survivor. What a remarkable character. He's actually a character in the story that all their feelings sort of come together and nurture this creature. And in doing so, they also nurture each other.
Absolutely.
I'd like to see, I'd like to imagine what that creature was like. It must have been tiny. And he doesn't even have feathers at the start because they grow the feathers later.
Right.
But what a
So
remarkable character. And I think you said the voices in the story that you hear are certainly Veronica's, Patrick, and the diary is profoundly important as well.
Absolutely, yes.
Some of the takeaways that I felt I got from the story: you cannot change the past. This is never about changing the past. This is never about redeeming the past. The harsh, difficult life that Veronica had isn't going to change. The losses stay lost. And yet at the same time, it's about recovering. It's about realizing what was and what is.
And accepting it.
And accepting it.
Yeah.
And really going ahead with her life. I find that, we live in a senior community. Okay. I find it very inspiring, encouraging. I can't change my past.
Oh, of course.
But the opportunities I have from one day to the next to do something, to live life, to rediscover who I am, what I can do, is very important to me.
Oh, I think to many of us who are living here, absolutely. And in this community that we're in, what opportunities we have to open so many new doors. And we accept our past, open new doors, and get on with it.
So let me sum up with this, Susan. I would certainly, I think you'll agree, we recommend the book.
Oh, absolutely.
It was a fun read. It was not a difficult read. It was fun. I enjoyed the scenes, one scene on top of the other, in Patrick's voice and Veronica's voice. Then you hear Terry's blog, and then you hear Patrick, and you hear Veronica, and they all tell the story in their own voice, which I think is important. One of the things I'd like to leave you with is, may you have penguins in your life.
So true.
We'll be right back with the author, Hazel Pryor. Welcome back to Eyes on Books. We'd like to welcome the author, Hazel Pryor, who is coming to us on Zoom from England. Welcome, Hazel.
Hi there, everyone.
Hi,
Really pleased
Hazel.
to meet you. Thank you for having me.
Wonderful to have you with us today, Hazel. Well, let's start. My first question is, what was your inspiration for this book and these wonderful penguins?
Well, there were two main inspirations for this book. One was that I wanted to write about somebody who was much older, because I've been reading an awful lot of books about people in their 20s. And I left my 20s behind a long time ago. And I just thought, gosh, I'm still having lots of adventures, still learning. And I know lots of people who are much older than me, in their 80s, even in their 90s, who are doing amazing, amazing things. Why aren't we reading about them in novels?
Oh, good.
So I thought I would write my main character as a really old person. Well, not really old, but, in her 80s, which would also give me scope for having lots of things, interesting things happening in her past, because, of course, she's full of stories. Lots and lots of things have happened to her before. And I also had the idea of penguins, partly because my book, I had a 2-book deal with the publishers Penguin, both in this country, in England, and also in America. And that put the idea of this little quirky bird into my head. And I have a really, really good friend who is madly, madly into penguins. And she actually had a bit of a penguin story of her own, nothing to do with Veronica. I was just going to say that this friend of mine, her husband died really suddenly, but she decided to give herself a mission to help her through, to give her things to look forward to. And her mission was to take photographs of every single species of penguin in the wild. And she's done that. She's traveled to all these different countries, taken photographs of penguins in their natural environment. And she said that penguins really help you to smile because they're such amazing, funny birds. And it's really, really helped her get through. And that gave me the idea of healing through penguins. And I thought, okay, I will write a story about healing through penguins.
Now, well, it's a fascinating story, and it was remarkable to see the amount of research you did to write this book. And did it involve much traveling? Did you go to Antarctica? And where did you do most of your research?
I didn't actually go to Antarctica myself. It was too complicated and too expensive for me, but I quizzed my friend who had been to Antarctica, looked in depth at all her photographs and talked to her about her experience there. I also obviously did a lot of research with books, and online you can find out so much. There's a website called the British Antarctic Survey, which I used a lot, which has blogs written by scientists who are studying penguins in Antarctica. So you can see where I got the idea from. Yes. Blogs. And I found out an awful lot about what scientists do when they're studying penguins and how studying them tells us an awful lot about climate change. Mm-hmm. And I learned a lot about the lifestyle of penguins. And I myself actually saw penguins in a wildlife centre in the south of England. So I didn't have to go far at all. But I spoke to the staff there a lot, and they told me all about their experience of hand rearing a little baby penguin. So I also managed to put that into the book.
My favorite characters in the book is Pip. And I have to wonder, how large would that little penguin be in inches? Can you, a baby penguin they're small creatures.
Yes, so these are the Adelie penguins, and they're one of the very small breeds actually. So the egg, I guess, would be I can't really show you on screen, a few inches, not more than. So as I said, I think when Veronica finds the penguin, he is the size of a teacup, if that gives you an idea. So yeah, really very little. But I got in touch with a few scientists and asked them, for exact dimensions, and they said, oh, we don't really measure them because they're so squashy when they're little. They're really soft and squashy, so you can't really assess how tall they are. But they obviously, when they're bigger, they stand up more upright and you've got more of an idea. But then they would only come up to your knees, I think, the adult Adelie penguins. So they're not very big at all.
One of the features of the book that I especially enjoyed is the sense of family that evolves with these people at the laboratory location in Antarctica. There's a closeness there, there's a dependency, relying on each other to survive and to engage with the penguins. That was charming. Have you always had an affection for animals?
Yes, I have always absolutely loved animals, and wildlife generally I find very inspiring and absolutely fascinating. But yes, my research actually, I read a book by a guy who was relating his experiences of being in this tiny little scientific camp in the middle of Antarctica. So that sort of made me realize what a close-knit thing it is when you're out in these incredibly harsh conditions and you're just with 2 or 3 other human beings for months on end. And there's no social life outside of that. There's just, miles and miles of snow and ice and penguins, and just, 2 or 3 of you, and you have to find a way of mucking in. And you're really reliant on each other for life, in all sorts of ways, emotionally dependent on them, financially dependent, physically dependent. If something happens to one of you, that's a disaster because there's so few of you there and there's not really any help on hand. Nowadays, you have much, much bigger scientific centres. This was set a few years ago. Of course, things have changed quite quickly, but this was one of the smaller ones, which I thought would make for a very interesting plot.
Well, I quite like Veronica. I am not entirely comfortable with the term curmudgeonly. She's quirky, I give you that. But I was telling Susan earlier that I find her very much brave and resolute.
Oh, absolutely. She was. I mean, she's a force. She was a great. She must have been a fun character to write. The strong force of a woman. I kept putting the
Yes.
face of Maggie Smith to her, and very strong, determined, and all of that. But I thought she was pretty much a curmudgeon too. Rather unlikable, very unlikable. See the layers of her peel away over the book. Where she became just so endearing. And by the end of the story, I mean, I was in tears by the end of the story when you realized what this woman had been through and how truly brave she was.
She is. She's an incredible character, and obviously it's strange being an author because you don't really know your character so well when you set off. I mean, I set out to make her a very strong, brave woman who'd been through a lot. But obviously, as the book evolved, I got to know her more and more, and I got to really admire her myself. Because at the beginning of the book, you might not warm to her much because she is quite rude and
Yes.
quite dismissive
Absolutely.
about other people, in fact. But I think, as you say, you do peel the layers back and realize that there's so much more to her. And she's dismissive for a reason because she's been really badly hurt in the past. And hopefully, as you go on through the book, you'll begin to understand her more and all these other things that have gone on with her. And she is a really good person in spite of, her abrupt manner and her seeming rudeness. She is actually a really good person who wants to make the world a better place.
Right.
And I'm really glad that you picked up that you saw Maggie Smith in the part because actually, when I was writing it, I had her image in my head and I could
See?
really
gosh.
see her playing the part.
Yes.
So I'm really, really glad that she's now no longer with us. Obviously
know.
sad, because it's a tragedy in itself, what a legend she is. But I would have loved to have seen her playing that part. If ever it got made into a film, a movie, she would just be incredible, wouldn't she?
Oh, she would
Wouldn't
be
she?
fabulous.
And you're not that far away because the way the book is written, it's written in scenes, one scene after the other. And it's a little bit like a screenplay, but so much more fun to read. But you could almost film it that way. Maggie character, we're coming for you. Maggie Smith.
Maggie, yeah, it was a little confusing to begin with, and I mean the first chapter is through Veronica's point of view, and then we have Patrick's point of view, and then we have a penguinologist's point of view in the next chapter, and it goes on, and they fit together so beautifully, all the different points of view to make it that one really readable story. One thing I wanted to mention was this 85-year-old woman who has all her wits about her, sort of, but you added that bit of dementia at the very beginning of the story about the mirrors where she has her, the housekeeper, Eileen, take down all the mirrors in the house because she doesn't like to look of her face anymore. And then the next day
Well, one of the things she says in the book explicitly, a woman can only take so much truth.
That's right.
Yes.
And then the next day, she wakes up in the morning and she says, Eileen, what's happened to all the mirrors? That was a nice little touch.
Yeah, she has this little thing about the mirrors, and I slightly mislead the readers there into thinking she might have dementia. But she doesn't really.
No.
She
does not.
No, she's just liable to change her mind.
Yes.
And then pretend she hasn't changed her mind and blame it on other people instead.
Oh, she is so sneaky.
One of her little quirks. Yes.
Well, I think it's almost more important than liking a character in a novel is caring about them.
Yes.
They're going through.
I agree.
We go with the character because we want to know what's going to happen. It matters. it's important that some change is going to occur in their life. We want to be there. We want to know what's going to happen. And so I cared about her.
Oh, absolutely. We absolutely do. And I love the fact that you chose a woman that was in her 80s to write about. You know, we live in a senior community. There are 18,000 of us that are getting old, and we identify with so many aspects of what you've been writing about, the second chances, opening new doors, you know, dealing with the past and all of that. And I found it really quite a remarkable book. And I do hope that our many book groups here do take advantage of your wonderful book.
It's a wonderful book. And I think you may have another book coming. Can you give us a quick preview?
Now, I did write a sequel to that because it did incredibly well in this country. So there is a second Veronica story, which you can get in America, although it's not published by American publishers. But that is called Call of the Penguins. So again, you've got the UK version there, which you can get hold of in America.
Okay.
And that is all about, I wrote this in lockdown, so I went a little bit mad in my imagination and sent my characters to 5 different continents of the world. So it's set all over the place. I couldn't travel myself while I was writing it, but I really traveled a long way in my imagination. And in that story, Veronica befriends a wildlife presenter. I think you'll probably be familiar with the work of Sir David Attenborough.
Yes.
He's very well known over here. So he's a little bit similar to Sir David Attenborough in character, an older gentleman who's incredibly knowledgeable and well-travelled and knows all about wildlife. So he's a little bit like that character. Veronica befriends him and gets to travel with him and co-present a TV wildlife documentary about penguins. And there's also a young girl in there called Daisy, who is 9 years old, and she gets to travel with Veronica. She's recovering from cancer, so she's got her own kind of complicated backstory. But it's about those characters coming together, being with lots of penguins, and also learning more about Veronica's past.
Oh, I can't
Thank
wait
you,
to
Hazel.
can't
I've
wait
just
to read.
written a third in the series, which I'll have to just flash at you as well,
Gone with the
which is
penguins.
called Gone with the Penguins, which is coming out in this country in 2 weeks' time.
Oh,
And I don't know whether
Congratulations.
it'll be out in your country at all, I'm afraid. I don't know.
okay. Well,
That's gonna
we'll
be
watch for it.
We will look forward to it.
Very exciting news. Very
Thank
exciting.
you, Hazel.
Thank you, Hazel.
It's been so enjoyable. Thank you for joining us today at Eyes on Books. We had a wonderful conversation with Hazel Pryor, talking about the book, How the Penguins Saved Veronica. Join us again next time.